Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. This episode is part of a special partnership with MTArt Agency, a certified B Corp award-winning talent agency for the most exciting, up-and-coming visual artists worldwide, and a creative agency that delivers exciting, art-driven projects for brands, public bodies, and cultural organizations. While the art industry typically concentrates on selling art that hangs on walls, MTArt's visionary approach focuses on investing in and supporting the people behind it. In this episode, I sat down with Walter and Zoniel, an artist duo represented by MTArt Agency. We talked about their art, which involves a multidisciplinary approach and often results in interactive and socially engaging installations. A central theme in their work is the sublime, but also the human condition through questioning our relationship with our surroundings. They work with different mediums by using nature or other tools such as handmade cameras or innovative printing techniques, which is also something that we talk a bit more about later in the episode. Public art and accessibility are important themes for the duo, as they believe art is for everybody, so they enjoy creating pieces for the public domain as well. Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Zoniel, for sitting down with me, and to MTArt Agency for this collaboration. This is the second in a series of monthly episodes with MTArt, so listeners, do give myself and MTArt Agency a follow and turn on notifications for All About Art to stay updated on the next episodes. And now, on to the interview. I am just going to dive right in with the first question. Thank you both, first off, for sitting down with me today. I want to start with introductions. Can you tell me a little bit more about your artistic practice? For example, what mediums do you use and what is your work about? It's to give our listeners who may not be familiar with your work a bit of a better idea.
So our work is really about kind of connecting to the sublime, and it falls into two main categories, one of them being public installations, and the public installations are pieces that are generally interactive out in a public space, and they utilize color and joy and surrealism to have people engage in a way that's meant to be euphoric.
Also fun.
Fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
Often a dirty word in art, but yeah, fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was trying to stop myself from wobbling immediately. So then the other part of our practice is completely mixed media. So we've got a lot of work that we've done utilising old school photographic techniques, taking apart old school photographic techniques and taking apart cameras and all sorts of things like that, and recombining them with modern technology and with painting and other kind of antique processes, I guess, as well, like gilding and
yeah, a bit of everything. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, something we haven't done. Yeah, I think we utilise everything and anything that comes our way. We're not an artist that repeats a single little technique until it's perfected. I think we utilise techniques for a purpose, ideally to express joy and fun and these sorts of sensations for people who wouldn't not necessarily have access to that. That's the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the board, our work is about this connection to the sense of sublime. I mean, that's something that's kind of very much a term that you can see historically in art, the connection to the sublime, but how we relate to that in the modern day world, that's where we think utilising terms like fun and joy and euphoria are the kind of modern versions of how the general public might relate to that concept. And I think all of our work is kind of looking at that. Our work, we are relentlessly learning. We love learning. We're constantly kind of researching scientific and artistic processes, and all of our work tends to combine process and concept in equal measure. So we might kind of learn about a process and be like, oh, this is so fascinating, and then we kind of put that in the mental bank until you have a conceptual reason for using it, and when those two things come together, then we might create a new process or adapt that process to making a piece of work that we think kind of elevates it.
I would actually love to hear a little bit more about something that you've both briefly touched on, and that is the process of building tools to create your artworks, such as cameras that you've made to capture photographs.
Well, you want to go?
Yeah, I think firstly it started, I suppose, utilising building cameras, large-scale cameras was in the early days. We wanted to create these life-size as in representation of life-size portrait, 20 by 24 inch and 16 by 20 inch glass plates. And at the time, researching this, most people on the internet were like, oh, you need a certain type of camera, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. And so it was trying to recreate something in order to make something. So it was like, oh, why don't we just think outside the box? So we built room-size cameras and built the mechanism inside the room-size camera rather than building a traditional camera, which would have been a big box with a bellows on it. And so, yeah, I think it started from that point, and then going forward, every new idea we have, always like, okay, is there something that exists that allows us to make this, or...
Yeah, once we kind of broken down those walls, then that just became the way that we worked, I think, effectively. So things like when we made ginormous seascapes that were salt prints made out of the sea, then that's a modern way of utilising the very first form of printing. So salt prints, the very first print type. At that time, you could only make it as large as, it's a direct print, so it's like you can only make it as large as the negative was. So now we can print ginormous digital negatives. And so that was like this pairing of old and new techniques, and that meant, oh great, we've got enormous negatives, but now we need enormous trays to develop everything in.
And at the time we were in a house in the middle of a forest in Scotland, and so we had to build everything remotely. So we built the trays, built everything. In fact, ended up building a floating frame that would archivally wash the prints in the river.
Taking the salt back to the sea,
which
was delightfully poetic at the end, wasn't it? That moment was really great. But everything, even within that process, it's quite difficult, I guess, in this context to explain all the details of that, because some of them are quite visual. But even things like how you transport ginormous sheets of paper, and you're going through several wet processes, and there's two of you lifting them from one tray to another, things like that, you have to kind of improvise, and you have to make the tools for that, which that one involved us weirdly using drain pipes, where we wrapped the prints around pieces of drain pipe so that they would not hopefully rip. Some of them did. Because
you imagine the salt prints it takes all day to make one. So you wake up in the morning, and it will take you 8-10 hours to finish that print. And at the end of the day, it's been through so much. Even though it's the best print paper in the world, it can be in that final tray, and it could just, you lift it up the wrong way, it just rips. And so there's nothing you can do about that apart from walk into the forest and scream, pretty much.
One at a time.
One at a time, obviously. Slightly like The Shining,
But not really like The Shining.
No.
I mean, it wasn't like a horror film. Maybe
there was that weird
lion
thing in the woods with the big paw prints.
There were some big paw prints in the woods. That was Walter's first time out the city.
Oh no.
Middle of nowhere, and I was walking a dog, and my dog has normal size paw prints, and then there were paw prints the size of my hand, and I was like, that could eat us, whatever that is. I've no idea why it's in the middle of Scotland.
Yes, it's a herbivore. Everything's plant-based.
The famous herbivore lion of the wilds of Scotland.
That is. But you get all these urban, countryside myths.
So coming back to your artistic practice and going from your present practice backwards, I want to ask you both, how did you start your careers? And now as an artist duo, how was it before you met? And how did your art and your careers evolve after you met?
There's some major, big, long answers there. Yeah, there's so many sections to that.
That's a big question.
Starting from this moment,
From this
going
point,
back
going
in time.
backwards, we've made so much work of such varying degrees and such varying complexities. That each one is a story in its own right. I don't even know where we would begin on that.
It's strange because I do feel, well, we've been discussing this recently, strangely, of how this is quite a kind of moment in time for us, quite a key moment of reflection. So we have been thinking about that. But in terms of, I think, weirdly, we kind of, as we became an art duo, that's when we kind of like pretty much became artists at that point in time. We both did things prior to that were creative and different types of art. But I think that this journey weirdly started when we combined forces effectively.
Yeah, I think, in an official sense, we just became artists. Such a weird term, but we became artists when we worked together. Whether I still feel like an artist I have no idea. I just create stuff.
But were you not singular artists? Like, did you not have kind of singular artistic practices before?
We had different creative practices.
Totally different creative practices.
Different.
Yeah.
And we had previously made art or being artists, and but that was in different ways. So so I think that it's a funny thing, that defining moment of defining yourself as an artist as well. I think that's what Walter was just referring to as well, in terms of what when people feel that they can take on the mantle of being an artist. And I feel that point happened certainly when we joined forces and we felt like we're an artist duo, this is what we're doing, there's that focus. But prior to that, we both were doing things that were forms of art effectively. Walter making forms of street art and
so I'd made street art since I was a kid and through uni, but I never thought of being an artist, and I wouldn't have told, if anyone had said, I'd never have said it was art. I was obsessed with making things that hadn't been made before, so it wouldn't be stenciling or painting. It was different types of stuff.
All kind of conceptual, really.
Conceptual. Even when I was young, people would steal cars and burn them out near where I lived, and I went and studied calligraphy with what I thought were old women at the time, which were probably women in their 20s and 30s at night school. Do you know what I mean? But when you're a young boy, aged like 13, 14, you're the only one in the class. And then I used to paint them on cars. And looking back, I think these things were extraordinary, but at the time they weren't. And I didn't see it as art. And then I did a degree in science. I didn't do a degree in art. And so I just made art as a thing to do for enjoyment. It wasn't really a career or a choice or anything like that. And then I was doing photography and then fashion photography, and I was still making the street art. And it was whilst making the street art, we made a solution. We made a photographic emulsion that wouldn't react to street light, so we could paint it on the walls of London at night. And with a 5.4 enlarger welded to a car battery and an alternator, we would then make chemical prints on the walls around London. So no one else had ever done it before. So graffiti boys would be like, what the fuck is that? Because it's like, it's not sprayed, and it was black and white prints all over. And that was, but I still didn't really consider myself being an artist doing that. I mean, that's when I met you, and kind of, I was still making stuff. And it wasn't solidified until we kind of got together and
decided
I started to make these portraits and together, and then that was it, really. We built a giant camera to make these. We wanted to capture. Like those, but they weren't coloured, but they were on glass.
Yeah.
So, and it was to capture kind of our friends. So it was like this idea we had was that Warhol had captured these people and he just screen printed them, and he captured everybody. It wasn't we always associate with the famous people, but the ones that are really interesting are the people who were there at the time and never really became famous. And I just thought it was interesting to do that because we lived in warehouses and kind of squat warehouses in Shoreditch. And to capture the musicians, artists, actors, actresses, people we knew from going out in a format that hadn't been done before, and to kind of capture them in this 1-to-1 life-size ratio. And that's what really started us off, wasn't it, I think? And we did end up doing 50 portraits.
I think that, and doing kind of developing shadows onto the walls of the studios, because that was kind of a similar time.
That came after the camera, though, wasn't it? It was a similar time, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it was definitely an overlap.
It was an overlap.
50 portraits took ages to shoot.
Yeah, but it was the thing that got us noticed by a show studios thing, which was on. So we built it live, which was streaming on the internet. Which was in the early days of streaming on the internet. It was like nowadays people take it for granted.
Yeah.
But then Nick Knight had this huge numbers of people would log in, mainly through it was mainly again through fashion and art, and we shot the glass portraits on that, and then that's when I suppose we became officially artists.
Mm-hmm.
We sold artwork.
I don't think we ever had an official moment, have we?
People were buying our work.
Is this our official moment?
Yeah, I have no idea.
I'd be honoured, but I think it happened long ago.
Yeah.
I don't think that.
And
I feel like it was something. I feel that sense of it being something that we sort of decided together.
Yeah.
That this was, and in a way, I think that is quite key, because I think that I meet a lot of people who are artists who are really shy to call themselves artists, and I have certainly gone around making them sit in the corner and repeat the words "I am an artist" like 15 times until they shout it out, and they're like, "I am an artist!"
Yeah.
And then it's like, you're making art, you're an artist, it's what you do.
Yeah.
And but I think that sense of doing it together certainly empowered us to feel like that was a definitive step, because when there was two of us, we had to clearly be aware of what we were doing to make that move forward.
Yeah.
To make anything.
And now, what is your dynamic like as an artist duo? What does your day-to-day look like when creating work? Or does someone take care of one thing and the other person takes care of another thing when it comes to your creative process or anything like that?
Project to project,
yeah,
really.
It's completely project to project.
Okay.
And we
obviously have strengths and weaknesses. Zoniel's a far better painter than I will ever be.
No.
Yeah, totally. Especially for like the kind of fine details of things.
I always
like
end up getting stuck doing the tiny things with like 15 magnifying glasses.
She has that. Where are those goggle things over there?
Those goggle things.
Yeah, you put on. Like,
nearly
the
go
jewelers
blind
have.
trying to like get.
I bet that's a lovely sight.
Yeah.
From one side to actually the other. I think the balance is that we both have very different ways of approaching the same thing. We don't really have a kind of day-to-day process, because obviously we work project by project, and because of the spectrum of the styles of our work, then that
sometimes
means
3 projects in one go.
So we literally have a big book of ideas of things that we want to make, and things like public installations take sometimes years in the planning. But when it comes, so what we'll do is we'll have an idea, it'll come together, the concept and the process, and then we'll kind of work out how that process might work, and there might be just different parts that interest one of us more than the other, and generally we kind of like come together with an idea of one of it, so say an idea to the other, and then we'll kind of sit with that for a second, and then we'll have a big argument about it, and then we'll go, well, in a positive way. I think the word argument is like often used in a negative way, but as a debate about it, shall we say. And that is part of the most wonderful bits of being in a duo, because we get to pull these things apart and really
apart your ideas
try
and remake something new. Yeah, I mean, otherwise you become just this, I don't want to be derogatory, but like a one-trick pony. You know, I think with 2 people, it's actually, you bounce off each other quite a lot, you know, and to be fair, we have more ideas than we can ever physically make. And we also have ideas that you have to constantly pitch for, say, like, we have big installations you want to make. So then they're kind of like taking something that's purely imaginative and trying to create a 3D rendering or whatever it is, a maquette, to create and show someone your vision in order for them to fund it, for it to happen in a year or 2. It's a strange process.
Yeah, that is definitely a strange process. But I think in the practical level of working, then we'll just kind of find a flow as we go through whatever each of those processes is. And when it comes to it, then we become like a mini little factory where we just kind of like, say, to reference the seascapes, which is quite simple, because then, you know, we'd have like daytime of developing and doing those things, and then nighttime of working on like coating the pieces so that it was definitely blacked out. And you just get into a kind of rhythm with each process, and then by the time you come to the end of it, and you kind of relinquish it. But there isn't one definite, okay, Walter does all these bits and I do all those bits. There is some areas of that within, like I will tend to hand colour and gild things, but you've done parts of that as well.
I've done parts of that, yeah, and I will tend to do chemical stuff. Back in the day, we haven't done a lot of chemistry stuff recently. In the early days, I would take apart chemistry and think about how to make new chemistry or reutilize a very old photographic process and change it either chemically or change its process so that we could make something new with it. But
I hate measuring chemicals.
Yeah,
It scares me to death.
it's the same in
I can
cooking.
do
So
it.
I like to bake. I would bake things at a very precise and follow a recipe, and Zoniel would hate
I'm
to follow a
intuitive.
recipe.
I'm definitely
Yeah.
more like you.
Yeah.
I think
Zoniel.
that's a really good analogy, because
Yeah.
cooking, you're either a recipe person or an intuitive cook.
Yeah.
But effectively, everyone who's an intuitive cook had to learn a recipe
Yeah.
but maybe they just learnt it from a person rather than from a book.
Yeah.
Um,
But even recipes, even if I look at them, I don't really follow them. I just kind of eyeball it and I'm like, well, I guess that's going to work. I guess I'll throw some of that in there and we'll see.
Exactly. If there's something which I don't know how to do it, then I'll look at kind of 6 different recipes and I'll choose 3 and a bit from each of one. And I'm like, I'm not sure how confident I am in that concept. And see how that works out.
That is the most accurate thing. It describes me and how I cook as well. It's so accurate. Oh my goodness. That's quite funny.
Well, so then maybe that kind of gives you quite a good insight into how we work then in that respect, because we'll do that. But having said that, then we have things. So Walter is an incredible maker of rules, and he will make really distinct, defined rules, and he'll tell me all the rules, and then I'm a really great follower of rules.
And I'm
so
a
once he
great
tells
breaker
me,
of rules.
and then he just stops. So I'm just following the rules because I respect all that kind of, cataloguing and understanding that he's put into it.
Yeah.
And then he'll start breaking the rules, and I'm just like, "But you created the rules." This is just completely blown my mind. So the recipe thing gets turned on its head in that concept. So we
Sure.
yeah. It's just like a nebula mist of creativity.
No, it sounds like it works really well.
Yeah.
The way that it is, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, it does. It's really enjoyable, even the bits that are like the most trying.
Yeah, I think the most trying bits would be even worse if you're by yourself. I can't imagine being an artist by myself and just being like in a hotel room somewhere in another country or whatever, and just be like, doing an installation. It'd just be fucking terrible.
Terrible.
It would be terrible.
To all the solo artists listening, please don't feel discouraged.
Well, I mean, I assume they do like other musicians and people. They surround themselves with people for comfort, But
Yeah.
I
And
think we are
support,
incredibly
I think, as
lucky
well.
in that
And
respect.
collaboration. I don't think musicians just surround. I think the thing is that we spend all of the time together,
Yeah.
and so
No,
that
we have
I
done.
guess
we were the OG bubble before bubbles
yeah,
existed.
we can't use the term
Oh,
bubble
yeah.
anymore.
Sorry,
Or
you've
maybe
got to cut
people.
that out. I don't know. Yeah, we before COVID, we used to describe people. We lived in a bubble. We didn't watch or read the news, and haven't done since we met. And we would create this bubble of existence, and that's our world. And the only way we saw to exist in the world was being positive and making things. And if people, as our bubble moved around the world, it affected people in a positive way. That's all the only thing we could do. We couldn't deal with the bigger picture. But hopefully I have this idea that it's a ripple effect. If we're kind to this person, they're happy, they're kind to the next person. And it's
That is the bigger picture in my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I can completely deal with the bigger picture because I create the bigger picture in my own mind, as everybody does on a daily basis, but it's up to each individual what they take on board. So I think that, what Walter's saying is that we created our own environment in that context. And I
we
think
still
that's,
do. We didn't. Yeah.
Well,
People come up to us and go, blah, 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 blah. Do you know this? And I'm like, what? What the hell are you talking about? Of course I don't know. I have no idea. Like,
to give some reference there.
I don't know.
What does
I couldn't
blah,
think
blah,
of,
blah,
well,
blah
like,
mean?
even when
The
COVID
news.
happened, we were in the middle of, I had no idea for months, before it happened, really. We were on the West Hill with Craig, and he was like, this thing's getting serious. I'm like, what bloody thing? It's like...
Yeah, so we kind of purposefully don't read the news. We've kind of...
And we live together, and, we don't... Yeah, when we're working, we're not hermits, but we're working on something. So it's like you're at the studio, you're out. If we're out, we're probably out in the countryside walking the dogs and things like that. We're not like...
Yeah, but I think the to bring the focus back to actually the question and what
No
this
idea what the question was anymore.
has any relationship with what we're talking about is that we are believers in creating our own environment
And
that
existence, yeah. The
in
news
itself-
is just someone else's story and
Babes,
narrative.
can you just stop?
You've got to keep that
Every
bit in.
time I'm trying to explain it in a
Coherent way.
relative way. You're like, the news, blah, 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 blah.
Again, pretty good exemplification of your dynamic right here.
Exactly. I love the conceptual aspect of things, and I think, well, basically the way that element of our dynamic is that a really important element of it is that between the two of us, then that sense of being in a bubble in terms of not protecting yourself from the outside world, but creating something from internally out and creating an environment that you want to create from. I think it's kind of completely essential for artists per se, whether you're working in a duo or individually. It's just that because there's two of us and because we spend the whole time together, then it means that is our whole life effectively. So everything ends up becoming a piece of art, literally. Like whatever we're doing, whatever time of day, it always ends up that is part of our creative practice at some point. It will rear its head somewhere down the line. And that kind of sense of being in the bubble really is important to go. I mean, when you're creating art, you're supposed to be making something new in terms of not the newness that is like the throwaway newness that people are kind of addicted to, but the newness in terms of like the constant sort of expansion of our minds and that way of being able to kind of look at something in a fresh way. And so to do that, it requires that you have to kind of not just constantly be responding to the massive influx of information.
And nowadays there's a massive influx of information. So much.
So you have to decide where you want to focus upon, and that's what we do. And that is, so within our kind of creative dynamic, then part of being the two of us, part of that bubble-like nature, affords us that.
So being within this bubble and working together, how did you come to be with MTArt Agency? What does it mean to be an MTArt artist?
Well, so we met Maureen at the very beginning,
when
she was forming MTArt, and we shared some of the early ideals. But then we carried on. We've always worked kind of independently. We have worked with galleries, but we have been very hesitant to sign a contract and be tied to one person. So all of our early career, and even now career-wise, we work with lots of different people all the time, and I think that's a very modern thing. But when we started out, that was not the way it was done. It's only recently it's changed, where you used to have a gallery, and the gallery would represent you, and they would represent you with another gallery in Europe or another gallery in America. And I think the gallery system is shifting, and then bit by bit it's completely almost, I won't want to say collapsing, but and agencies, and it's very strange when you actually reflect and think, actors, musicians, all these other artists have agents. They don't have one because their world wouldn't exist if there were these monopolies.
They have record labels, and they have publishing deals.
But they also have agencies to represent them in different countries, and prolificate. They're not tied to one thing, and then that manager won't go, you can only go to this manager in Japan, or you can only go to this manager in,
Yeah, I guess a good kind of example of the shift in the art world might be kind of how you looked, and it's very referential to MTArt because it's how you looked at old school Hollywood and how there used to be studios and those actors would be tied to studios, and now they have agents and they can do whatever they want, wherever they want, and somebody's representing an individual, because MTArt has been based upon that kind of LA talent agent model.
Also they've been based, it's all a lot of commercial collaborations as well, so it ties very well for our public installations. So I think it's a very flexible field. A lot of it traditionally would be like, it'd be somehow lesser to create a massive installation, and then if it was sponsored by, I'm going to say Samsung randomly, I don't know why, but but you know what I mean. But people would look slightly down on you and be like, they've.
Can you just say it? Sponsored by a brand.
Sponsored by a brand, and then but nowadays it isn't so. I think the borders have diluted again and again and again. There'll always be people who adhere to some sort of form of high art, this kind of elitist art, and whether that's backed by money or by technically education. People in charge generally aren't artists, which has always baffled me. You can't be the head of a national gallery and have never picked up a paintbrush. I mean, that's just insane.
Yeah.
For me, that is just insane. Or a paintbrush or a camera or anything. You know, I'm not mentioning any names or any galleries. But and I think the world is changing, and I don't think they're changing quick enough with it. And I think tech is having a good overhaul of all sectors, and I think the art world is slow to move. It's like a big ship. It's like, and whether it sinks or not, who knows? I don't know.
Obviously, it's not going to sink.
Well, the traditional form may, and other forms will pop up.
Everything is constantly changing, so I think there's no kind of sinking or swimming in that scenario. But
whether people who are born now will go to a gallery or whether they'll just plop on their VR to go visit a gallery is another matter in 50 years.
So being an artist with MTArt has been... It's a lovely experience, to be honest. So we met Maureen at the beginning of her forming MTArt, I think maybe even just before, and together we wrote a manifesto that was about an idea that we had called formationism, which was this idea of kind of clarifying what our work and a number of different artists that we were working with, not we were working with, but we were kind of like friends with and in shows with. And the idea of formationism was this idea that simply the conceptual and the process
were intertwined.
Yeah, were completely intertwined and they were not mutually exclusive. One had to be there for the other to exist.
Yeah.
And so we wrote this manifesto all together, and that kind of formed the manifesto of MTArt to start off with. But Maureen has come an incredible long distance since then. Like, I think MTArt has changed fundamentally since but those roots have definitely... Maureen has always been like super dynamic. She's always had like a really clear vision of what she wanted, and I think they've done just a really good job of actually reforming a part of the art world and inspiring other people to do similar things as well, or things that can work along with that. And in terms of working with them, I think one of the things that manifests is this idea of certain elements of public art being easier for us, having this kind of element of ease, because for us everything is so complicated and involved, and and say the whole team has done a whole series of different pieces of public art that are as simple as filling windows with images. And when our first kind of concepts of making public art was really because we wanted to make... We're firm believers in art being accessible, and the accessibility of art kind of runs through our practice, and that's why we first made installations.
That's the only reason we make installations. The idea is to reach people who would not generally go into an art gallery, and
have it on your street, just there, it's yours.
To create something wonderful that will,
inspire them.
Yeah.
And create a story of the future, effectively. And so, but within doing that, as soon as we did that, we became addicted to doing it, though, because
addicted to very expensive forms of making art, which you can never sell. And
expensive to make.
You give me 10 million quid, I build a 10 million pound big public installation.
When I think about like doing things, or when people talk to me about getting funding from certain places, I mean, obviously, for example, like I've spoken about this in previous episodes on the podcast, but the Sackler family and getting funding from not so ethical places. And things like that. But then there are certain things where I think it's a case-by-case basis, because if you take money from someone who's offering it in order to do some good by creating a public art project, then I think it's worth talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best way to go, but I definitely see where there's a lot of wibbly-wobbly, like,
there's a lot of grey areas, but also most money is, unfortunately, I'm not going to say unclean, but I mean, there's very few businesses that run ethically and for positivity that make a profit. Most money is built on the backs of other people, has been for thousands of years. And if your money comes from there, I mean, your money comes from there. As long as you do something positive with it,
but that's why MTArt is
rather
so...
than putting a jacuzzi on the back of a limo.
Well, I mean, you can only do what you can do, and I think like what you're referencing is it's not like art gives you absolution. It's not like you're kind of just blessing somebody and all your sins are absolved now, but also who are we to kind of point the finger at anybody else anyway and say, well, you're doing this and that's something that needs absolution, because all of us have kind of, essentially, I think it's best to kind of try and look for the best in every single circumstance. But I also think there's no point in, like you're saying, refusing something on the basis, why would you not take something or allow something to be funded from the basis of excluding somebody because of their apparent previous sins? Because then, that just puts you in the position of judging other people.
Exactly.
And, again, who are each of us to judge? Is it not better just to kind of actually to see the positive in every single circumstance, in every single person, and every single potential for that? And the more inclusive you can be in that way, then that...
The more people you reach.
It might upset some people, but that actually means allowing people who have done things that previously have not been good to become part of something that is good, because that's how change happens.
Yeah.
You can't change things by just saying we're going to exclude those people. That doesn't, there's no ripple effect in that.
Yeah.
That's my sermon over.
I feel like you guys were polar opposites on that in the very beginning with how...
Everything we do sounds like that. And then when you come to, because we are a nebula
But
mist.
yet we share one mind.
Yeah, we are. Which part of us the left brain? Which part of us the right brain? I don't know. Maybe the left bum cheek over here.
But speaking of brains, and also something that was mentioned earlier on in relation to education and experience and things like that, do either of you have a formal education in the arts? And if so, or if not, how do you think that that's affected your careers?
You were shaking and I'm nodding, so I thought I'll nod and you shake.
I didn't study art. I studied a degree in science.
But it had an artistic element in it.
Yeah, had an artistic, but also always interested in art. And then I suppose it helped in the early days of the photographic, taking apart old photographic chemistry and stuff like that. I think it helped in the early days. But also, I suppose a lot of people forget, a lot of artists were scientists or, had analytical minds. It wasn't so separated. It's only in a kind of modern educational system where you're like, here is art, here is science. Back in the early days, most scientists were very good draftsmen, were artistically speaking, had that side of their brain as well. And science isn't a matter of just following what someone else has done. To be a good scientist, you have to actually look laterally and create something completely new, which is the highest form of art. Someone's going, oh, actually, that's what I've just had this idea. This is going to now cure this. That's an amazing. They have to be completely creative. Also, they have to be analytical in the other sense.
Yeah, science and the arts are definitely entirely entwined in my mind and in our practice. And I mean, just science is in every day, as is art. So my background. It's funny to say my background. It sounds like so formal, as if I planned it somehow.
Yes,
it's entirely
unplanned.
Right. It definitely was just surrounded by creativity growing up. Well, my family has inherently artistic elements to their personal practices. I studied in a monastery, different creative processes from tanka painting to gilding, which is actually more well equipped than a lot of art schools that I've seen, weirdly, because we had everything from print rooms, casting, potteries, and they're practical elements of things that had to be made. So studied in that. I did do an MA in interactive multimedia, which I completely forget about, which is, I guess, completely relevant to what we do, but I never really thought about that. Yeah.
Do you not think that informs
For sure. You do? Everything informs.
Yeah. Everything informs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But because we get so absorbed in the present moment, and every single present moment, then those things definitely inform what we do. But we haven't come to the arts from a kind of typical, I guess,
route?
Arts education.
Yeah.
Though I think both of those things are completely valid art
100%,
educations. Yeah.
Part of me would be like, yeah, it would have been. I suppose it would have been interesting if you lived in parallel universes. What would it have been like if someone had, one of my teachers had gone, yes, go do art, and went to art school? Would I even be an artist now? I have no idea. It's such a weird thought,
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that was such a seminal moment for us to decide to do this together, and that was like kind of reflecting on your original question, which was that thing of.
I'm now doing the things I used to enjoy in my spare time as my entire existence, and I never thought that possible or conceptually or physically. We
just had to give up comfort and all the other things.
Yeah, but giving up comfort and stuff, in your 20s is just part and parcel of it. It's just like it's quite a part of the fun.
That's
not so much when you're washing in a bucket and freezing that bloody warehouse.
I didn't have to do that. However, my first apartment when I moved to London, it was so cheap, but the windows were so badly insulated, and it was a cold winter, and our washing detergent froze.
Wow.
You're like, that's cold.
That is quite like.
I had a hot shower, but I do kind of get where you're coming from with being like, moving to London, not really knowing what to do or how to do it, and then having to just do with what you can get. And it was that. But going off of things like that and thinking about, I think a lot of artists or people who wish to be artists or want to come into the sector, they feel like they need to get a formal education. And so that's something that I think I've spoken to a lot of people about, and how a lot of people say, no, it's not really always up to getting this formal education. It's not necessary. And it's something that the art world, I think, puts pressure on people to do. And so I wanted to ask you both, what change or changes, if you can limit it to just speaking about one at the moment, would you like to see in the arts and cultural sector?
Do you mean from the educational perspective or as the sector as a whole?
It can be anything. If you would like to talk about the educational side of it, sure. But if you want to pick anything that you'd like to choose in the sector that you'd like to change or see changes with.
Well, there's quite a few things.
That's kind of why I was like, okay, maybe education, but
I think one
really.
thing, but that doesn't really relate to the educational aspect. I do think from the educational aspect, if I could just split this into two questions, because first of all, start off with,
because like the education. Just going to take that one point, and I just need to split into two parts.
And just like a true politician, just talk over top of me.
Yeah. So in the education, I'll just
hand it over to the. No, I'm not going to define you as a. Okay, so. But in terms of education, education is a constant and ongoing thing. Okay, formal education has a start and a finish in a certain respect, but education, and I think if there's anything that you're doing, whatever it is that takes your heart, whether it's art, making art, or whether it's making anything whatsoever, then constantly educating yourself is always going to be a positive thing. And that's going to help feed your love and joy and journey of whatever it is that you do in life. In terms of what in the art sector I'd like to see change, try and make this the most succinct thing that I've ever said, would be that the curatorial aspect of the art world was not hitching its wagon constantly to whatever's trending politically.
Interesting.
I did it.
Dun, dun, dun. Educationally, I think.
Are you going to answer two questions too?
I think educationally, I didn't have an art. I haven't had an arts degree, but every artist who has been to art school has told me it wasn't what they expected, and they spent a lot of their time writing and learning about the history and stuff, which seems the most ludicrous situation whatsoever. I think if you're going to be an artist, you should be taught how to sculpt, how to paint, how to make. You should spend 99.9% of your time making. I think
physically practicing.
There's no point writing paper. Obviously,
there is a point.
There is a point because they need funding and they need to be able to mark people.
No, but there's also a point in understanding and learning, and like we constantly.
You can understand and read books and stuff. But why would you need to then write an essay on it? Why not just make some work?
That's why.
What?
I mean, you literally come from sciences so that somebody can understand that you understand what that's about.
But why should they? They don't need to. They just take what they need from it and then make it their own.
So
That's
you
the whole
just teach maths and then you just go, all right, you know that
so
now.
like, let's
I'm not going to mark
if you went back
question.
and you go, like, you're going to be a sculptor and you're going to go, right, we're not going to spend 2 years sculpting. What we're going to do is we're going to study Henry Moore, we're going to study all of these other people, and you can look at their work and their photographs, and then you're going to tell me what you think they were thinking and what you think, because that's all you're actually doing is theoreticizing someone who doesn't exist anymore. And I think that it's a sad state of affairs because, again, of public funding, that these institutions are bureaucracies. You know, they have to adhere to people who are giving them money.
They're a business. Obviously, it's a business, but there is
yeah.
a heartfelt.
And it never used to be that way. And so I think if I could press a magic button, then I would say that, if you were going to study art or photography and stuff, they should just make photographs, they should just be printing, you should just be sculpting, you should just be painting.
Just be more practice.
Yeah, if you want to study the past, but that shouldn't be the reason to make art. Christ. I mean,
to be honest, I'd be quite happy just never discussing the past again.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, if it's physically possible,
you don't need to know previous artists to become an artist. That's just the most ludicrous thing that's ever been taught, I think.
Well, I think that's definitely controversial, but not that it matters.
Because in our Western society, we decided that that's it. You look at the old master and you develop forward, and then that's ridiculous. And all they did was look at, Eastern art, African art, and just steal from that and make that representation. And then, what is the point? I think going forward, if you didn't know anything about art and you were just given a block of stone and you were given a paintbrush and a paint, be far more interesting.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't say what you changed in the art world, or would that be? Or dare I say?
The art
completely
world,
eradicate the past.
No, as you just said that.
I think in the art world it's fine in its existence. I just think it'd be nice if maybe more the government. It'd be more if there was more funding. That'd be simple. It'd be a nice, simple solution, I think.
That they're cutting arts education funding by 50%.
That doesn't surprise me.
I feel like that headline 50%. Comes around every 3 years.
Yes.
Well, now it's been approved in July.
We're down to like 1% now of just basically what it was. But we did hear a very optimistic and delightful statement.
That was from from the Arts Council, wasn't it?
Yeah, from the Arts Council. So they said that in times of hardship, effectively, their funding from lottery funding doubles as the other funding from the government decreases the same. It increases to basically the same amount because people are
when we're in a recession, more people buy lottery tickets, therefore there's more money for arts that comes from lottery funding.
So weirdly,
government cuts funding. So they balance out roughly.
That balances out.
Crazy.
Some people find that sad, but I find that quite happy because it does mean that essentially everything balances out in the end. And but I would just like to say, after saying what I'd like to change in the art world, I do think it's, art is made by artists, and this is probably the most controversial thing that I've ever said. Certainly shooting myself in the head, never mind the foot. But like the nature of curation, I feel, the nature of curation is a much more modern thing than creating art, obviously. So being a curator is a more modern idea, and I feel that is like that conduit to the general world, to like what is shown and how art is put forward to the world. And I think that's like a really important role that is very often just reflecting instead of creating. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a very important position to be in, to think about what you're doing and think, I just hear that this particular kind of thing is going on politically, or like whichever political agenda is happening, that is being reflected back, and consequently that is how you end up within the arts world that becomes the history that we shall never speak about, of trends. And if you didn't just respond to political agendas, then we wouldn't have that issue. You wouldn't have an issue of trends, and you'd have an issue of like genuinely channeling what people have spent their whole life energy on creating into something that would be a much more wonderful conduit to the public domain.
I would like to kind of tie the conversation back to your artistic practice again and talk about the themes that go on. So, Your practice investigates the connection between humans and the sublime. That's something that you mentioned earlier on in the episode. But your practice also investigates the connections between the elements and the sublime, or the humans and the elements, and humans and other humans. It basically is a very broad investigation of looking at how humans connect to other things.
Yeah.
So how
do we do all those things?
Yeah, how do you cover such a large scope in your practice?
Project by project.
Project by project.
It's project by project.
And because it is the kind of all-encompassing experience of our lives. And I think that it kind of goes round in a cycle within our practice, because we'll focus on a certain element. And one of the joys of our personal practice is because our minds kind of operate so quickly, and because we're constantly learning things, and we kind of will get very deeply diving into a certain subject or an aspect of that subject, and then we get so absorbed in that, and then we move on to another aspect of that same subject. But all of it essentially is about
human condition,
the human condition and just connection, essentially. Yeah. And we've looked at this in so many different ways. I mean, you can look at it scientifically, you can look at it on a kind of like macro level, and you can think about like the cosmos, or you can think about ourselves and all of that sort of structure. But all of it is about the relationship with the world, I guess, with our experience as a human. And but essentially, it's not just our experience as human; it's our experience as a human reaching a higher plane. So that does kind of dive into those different areas. But it's definitely something that we're thinking about at this moment, as we are having a moment of reflection of kind of like we've come to a point in our kind of practice where we're, all these different aspects that we focused upon, and I think it's the first moment that we've actually looked back at our own work and really seen our own story, because it's very difficult to see your own story that's up close.
I still don't see our own story.
That's why we're looking at it.
Yeah, I know. And I think the only common thread that I can say personally for me is the driving force constantly is to try and make art that's accessible for everybody. You don't need an arts background, and you certainly don't need any kind of formal arts education to enjoy. I think the idea is to take away this kind of, for the better word of it, this little white plaque of information from a piece of art, that you have in every gallery and institution. People come in and you look at a piece of art and then you go, I better read that, or that'll tell me what it means. Well, you shouldn't. What it means is what it means to you, and I think that's the lack of education. I think for us, is to create something beautiful or wondrous, or for me, fun. I love things that are fun. I mean, some of the best art pieces I've ever seen or been part of when I was younger that stick in my mind were fun. I think that's, for me, that's the overriding
essentially drive. I think what you're saying is that we want to create things that are empowering, so that people feel that sense of empowerment about art, or that it connects people without them having to feel that.
Yeah, it's not even empowering. It could be like, you could just be a regular teenage kid who saw one of the big jellyfish installations and they're now in their 20s. It's so surreal that they'll be in a pub, or in America, or in a bar, and they'll be like, do you remember when that jellyfish thing happened? And it'll just be, there'll be something in their mind. It's something you've made so powerful that it's a little memory in their mind that will resurface again and again and again. And what it does for that person, who knows? For some persons, it might inspire people. For other people, it's just a story that they tell again and again and again. And that is the highest form of art for me. That is the apogee or whatever, it's not.
But that's what I mean by empowerment. I mean, like, you're giving somebody something that becomes theirs.
Yeah.
So that's the act of empowerment. Like, they take it as their own.
Yeah.
That becomes part of their story rather than our story.
Yeah.
Or both of them, I guess.
So that's how, reaching the human condition rather than trying to deal with it. I think it's kind of, we just float these ideas, and they inform our work, that hopefully create these wondrous ideas that have the levels. So we have levels for people, so that the work has levels for people who need that, who have an arts education or a higher education and need more meaning in a piece of work. But ideally,
absolutely meaning in all of our work.
Yeah, I know. But ideally, you should just be able to take it on a surface level. Like, anybody should be able to. And
every single piece of our work. So we have obviously been in the circumstance where we see hundreds of people looking at either artworks that we have in a gallery or in an installation. And so the gallery, they're like physical artworks, as I can call them that, as opposed to installations. They tend to have the same response where somebody will look at it. We utilize beauty as a tool. That was our first kind of utilization of one of the dirty words of the art world, beauty. So for sure, I mean, like that's so kind of throwaway, but I think it's an essential aspect that always is opening people up. This is, beauty is something that draws you towards it, and it opens your mind rather than closing you off, which I think shock does. It kind of you might get a reaction, but that reaction is a solid and sort of like repressed reaction. Anyway, so people will look at a piece of art of ours, they'll be drawn to the kind of beautiful aspects of it, and then you can see it happen almost every single time. You can see the question arise in the head of like, what is it? How is it made? If it looks like a photograph, but then you look at it but it looks like a painting because it has brush marks, because all of the chemistry's been applied by hand, but the brush marks don't go with the way that a painting would be made. So then there's the question. And so then if they want to, which they tend to, they will find out what it is and how that process, that kind of process of it being made, or the story of it comes into it. But page one, it was always for us that you can just stand there and appreciate it and make a connection with it initially without having to go through the other stage. But that's what people tend to do. So it has like this, that door in is always the kind of like slightly unusual aspect of it, where you kind of think, hang on, that's not exactly what I think it is.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm going to continue with my penultimate question.
Okay.
And that is to each of you, what is one thing, one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is starting out in the industry who wants to be an artist?
You go first.
I think it's simple. I would pretty much ignore everybody and everything. And
that's why you're part of a duo.
Yeah. I know. But even so, you don't need to listen to curators or galleries or anything else. You like it, you make it, and it's wonderful, and you stick at it, and you just keep making it. The only reason you're not a success is if you rely on other people's opinion of you to deem you a success. So, and some of the, as we know, some of the greatest artists that have ever lived.
Most of the greatest artists that have ever lived. I know how you're going to...
No. In art history, some of them, because some of them had very, very pandered and wonderful existences, but some of them had never even sold a painting, and that's it. I think if you want to be an artist, be an artist. Don't want to become, a celebrity artist or whatever it is that, that fame and fortune. You can be an artist purely, make whatever it is you want to make, and just stick at it. And I don't think you should rely on other people's opinions, basically. That's my only thing. I think people get swayed, like you said, on the trends, political environments, whatever's relevant at the moment.
Yeah, actually, just a quick intercept of flashing back to that. So I think one of the dangers of what I was talking about before with curation is that then artists start making work that responds to the curator's choices, that responds to politics, and so it ceases to be progressive. So my advice to how did you put it? Somebody...
To love everybody and everybody's opinion.
I don't love everyone's opinion, it's not that. But
to somebody starting out.
Would be to ask yourself, take yourself somewhere that you love and ask yourself the question, what you are willing to relinquish to do this. If you want to do this, and if it's the most important thing to you to create, why do you want to create? Ask yourself these questions. Why do I want to create? What do I want to create? And what am I willing to relinquish to do this? Because you might have to give up the rest of your life to do that. And kind of reflecting upon what Walter said, if you're focused on, if you decide, I want to create sculpture, I want to make particular works that are about trees, whatever, and this is the most important thing to me, and I am willing to, not get married, not have children, not have anywhere to live that has any heating.
Hang on, first 10 years of your life.
Do pee in a bucket, have to empty the bucket that you pee in every day as well and wash it, don't forget that, and do other things to make money, or just do this and become very, very skinny, and decide what you're willing to give up, because it's kind of the polar opposite end of what he was saying, I guess, because he's saying if you not wanting to do it to become a celebrity, the flip side of that is like, do you love this enough that this is actually like genuine? So is it the most important thing to you so that it feels like love? Does it feel like love? If it's love, it'll feed you forever. And if it's not, then it'll fade and you will die hungry. So
very poetic.
Basically.
Yeah,
but honestly, like, I really relate. I mean, I'm not an artist, but I chose to come into the arts despite everyone saying you're never going to make any money in it. What are you doing? Why are you going and accruing this amount of debt to go to university to study art history and then, do all these different things? And it has really kept me going because I love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the important thing. Yeah.
That is, life requires sustenance. So when you say keeping you going, that's the times when you need to be kept going. But there needs to be enough of the flip side so that you're soaring through it, so you're loving it, so it fills your bones and it makes you feel like on fire when you come up with, when you say from that perspective, when you're learning things historically, and when you're, for us, when we're creating things, it's like that has to set you on fire.
Yeah.
That's got to sustain you.
Yeah.
And it is the thing that comes first above all other things,
Yeah, I mean, we don't have children because we make art.
Yeah, but also there's no there's no need for any. If you had £100 now, I wouldn't go and buy a Ferrari. It'd just be like, what would be the point? I don't need a Ferrari.
Yeah.
It has no relevance to me whatsoever. So it's like,
definitely just buy bloody more tools and material.
Yeah, exactly. As we get more money, we
make
just
buy more art.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh my God, so many books.
Build a house from books. Yeah.
So many books. My night table is books. I just have my whole just.
Well, that keeps you fit as well. Moving all your books, definitely.
It does.
It's like every time you move house and you have to pack all your books, and you're like, do I really want all these books?
Oh,
you're
it's horrendous.
Yeah. You decide. I mean, there's two sides to the same coin. It's loving it and really loving it, and what you love about that. I love it. I just love it so much. And there's been so many
but you
mental.
Don't even, it's not like I love it. It's not even a questioning.
Yeah, because
you just
love
wake up
is
and
unquestioning.
it is what you wake up and it's the first thing you think about in the morning and the last thing you think about at night.
It's what wakes me up in the middle of the night.
Middle of night.
It is our children.
Yeah, but
that's what it is. It's like every single moment of that, and
But you have to have that. If you don't have that, it's going to be bloody hard work.
No, if you don't have that, just do something else.
Yeah.
Find something
out else
that does
gives
that
you
for you, because that doesn't have to be it. There's so many million things. I mean, I remember being at school and thinking we had a careers fair or something. I thought about 5 jobs in the world, and then you're like, the more you get into a domain, then the more you realise there are so many different aspects to that.
Yeah.
So, yes, somebody starting out, how much you love it. Not like in the terms of like weighing out on a scale, because love can't be weighed in that way, but because if it feels like love, if it feels like if you've ever fallen in love, or if you've just fallen in love with creating, or you just fallen in love with art, if you feel like you're in love, just keep going. And remember what made you feel like that, and keep mentally taking yourself back to that place, because you need to.
Here. The eyes have it.
On that note, I'm going to ask the final question, which is kind of like a fun, lighthearted one. But the question is, do you have a favorite artwork or a favorite artist from art history?
It's got to be from art history, unless it's someone I've never met. So, sorry, not being semantics about it.
Going first?
No, you go first, because you definitely know.
I know mine, easy. Easy tick.
You're getting marked on
didn't study art history. I think I just remember seeing in a book quite distinctly in the library a picture of a Hockney joiner, and that kind of influenced me towards making art and street art and everything. It was just such a simple idea that was so revolutionary. It was just this image, and he'd made this almost 3D world using a flat surface, just a bloody 35mm camera, and no one else had thought of this before. and it was just a singular thought that made something wonderful. And my ignorance, I'll admit, I had no idea he was a painter for about 8 years after. Like, I always just thought Hockney was a photographer because I had no art history. I mean, I was actively almost an artist before I knew that Hockney had even painted. But the Hockney joiner, it was very key for me. As an image, it was like I was astounded, and I think it was also a motto for life to try and create something so wonderful, and it was so simple as well.
Yeah, I think it's the most difficult thing to make something
simple.
simple.
Astounding.
Well, mine's constantly changing. I don't really sort of reflect in that way that much. But I think at the moment, I would say it's the Basilica, St. Mark's in Venice, because I think that's like such a wonderful example of so many things that relate to the things that I find inspiring at this moment. Like, I could just stand and look at the ceiling, just the golden arcs of that so much. The fact that it encases loads of things that the Venetians looted from around the world, and then celebrated in their own specific way of creating this kind of wonderful building. And it's like a piece of conceptual art to me. I think it's like an installation. And the fact that it has the relics, I find that it's got relics of St. Mark in it, and it's got bits and pieces of this body in it. It's got a piece of gold. It's super inspiring. It has like the 4 horses at the front. It's just an incredible piece of artwork conceptually from so many different aspects, and you could just absorb yourself in it. You can just go in there and it's free and just stand there and all day. So I think at this moment, if it was something historical, it would be that. I think it completely is relevant to our practice. I think it's just in terms of us not wanting to, it's not like a current conversation, but in this literal current conversation, it is part of that. But in terms of, I think what we were saying is just, there's not a necessity to constantly look back. We're going forward. If you want to, you have to visualize what you do want and move towards that, rather than if you want to create anything new, you're always going to reflect on history and reflect on the past and then just kind of like sum it up. It's a very kind of sort of sludgy way of moving. But having said that, there are masses of incredible things that have happened obviously throughout humankind, and pieces of artwork that have been made, and those are wonderful things. And obviously in a certain respect, any single book that you read is effectively historical.
But also, it doesn't always, not traditional, it doesn't have to be art. I mean, one of the places we used to love going, or still do, is the British Museum. And the British Museum is packed to the rafters with artworks. I'm just going to call them artworks because everything in there has been made.
It's not seen as an art gallery, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it is absolutely
a museum.
It's almost overwhelming, and I mean, and people have taken from that for generations. I'm not saying the artists that went there before and created certain movements before us directly. But I mean, you don't have to take from it like that, but you can just be astounded by the beauty, and there's a connection to the past that makes you feel like what I'm doing is relevant. Whether the people of my time agree with it or anything is irrelevant. I'm just part of a long chain of artists that have gone back thousands of years, people who just wanted to make something beautiful.
Yeah, we are inherently connected to the past. I mean, we are the present moment, so how can we not be connected to the past? It's not about dissing the past in some respect, but just that to create, your focus has to be forward, that's all. So you're not kind of anti-history. In any respect, I think there's also kind of a certain amount of time that has to pass before you can relinquish an emotional relationship with the past. So what you're saying is quite relevant there, is like you go to a museum as opposed to, you're citing museum as opposed to many galleries or institutions that you go to, because they tend to have effectively newer, even though they can be ancient artworks, but they're newer than things are in the British Museum, because the British Museum has these like ancient artifacts, but they're things that are incredible. And it's inspiring to see that, 1,000 years ago somebody created something that now looks kind of modernist or something, and something that is inspiring, that is beautiful, that it had a relationship to their life, and that's why they created it. I mean, that's why we create art, because it has a relationship to our life, and we feel that this is effectively salvation, I think, and that is the sense. That's what our kind of creative process is salvation, because otherwise where is all that energy going, and what is kind of drawing you forward? I mean, from inspiration and salvation are kind of the two flip sides of that. But yeah, I think there's so many things that are historical things that are just wonderful artifacts. Well, not artifacts to say that they're not pieces of art, because they are, but they're just called that in a museum. But also museums, I mean, the British Museum has just that wonderful sense of calm and sense of awe, so that you kind of step inside. It is like an installation, those buildings, all of those kind of mega buildings that you walk in and you're just like, and they have this massive like slabs of benches that you can lie on.
If you ever feel that the modern world is getting too much, and you can pull yourself away from your little 6-inch screen and Instagram and your social media, the antithesis, leave your phone at home, go into the British Museum even for an hour, and you will be restored. Your levels will go beep, 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 bing.
Just
and then
an
you can
hour.
get back on your phone and you'll be like, you know, honestly, you know, that's another. I'll put that back into my advice for people that want starting out as artists. Yeah, turn off your phone, leave it at home, just go wander around somewhere like the British Museum for a couple of hours.
I think just give that advice to everybody, surely.
Yeah,
Anyone.
I'll take that advice.
I think artists
take
want to
that
go in the
advice.
British Museum, especially. You kind of want everybody to.
Yeah, and it's I
restorative.
think also it is harder, even in the 10 years we've been working, the increase in information and demand for proliferation of imagery or representation of people's lives. I think that is a very hard thing, and I think it's only going one direction. And I think how people will juggle that in the future, I don't know. But
I don't think you have to answer that question. It's okay.
but yeah, it's just something, you know, it's something we've not had to do and we don't do. So I think we're lucky in that respect. You know, I don't feel tied to an Instagram or a social media feed. You know.
But we will wrap up here, and I just want to say again, thank you so much for sitting down with me and inviting me to your studio and sharing this experience to create this episode.
Thank
I
you
really
very
appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, and hopefully there's some sense within all the crazy
I think you might need to
weaving.
edit a lot of that, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's all good. And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.